Welcome back to ESSA TV. Dr. Adam Bandt MP serves as the federal member for Melbourne. He was elected in 2010 when he made history by becoming the first Greens MP elected to the House of Representatives at a general election. Dr. Bandt has portfolio responsibilities for climate change, energy, employment, and industrial relations and science, research, and innovation. Dr. Bandt, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
What do you believe is the ideal solution to solving Australia's housing affordability crisis that will allow young people to be active participants in the housing market?
I think we need to go back to basics and start treating housing as a human right rather than an investment class, which is what we've done at the moment. And so our whole tax system is geared towards treating housing as a place that you can put your wealth in if you've got it, and you can put it into your second, third or fourth property, and the government essentially gives you tax breaks for doing it, subsidises you for buying more properties. So I would say we need to get rid of negative gearing for housing properties, and also capital gains tax deductions for housing properties in particular, for the capital gains tax deduction more broadly, but especially in the context of housing. Because what those two things together allow to happen is a skewing of wealth into housing that pushes up prices and creates a further inequality between the generations, because what it basically means is that if you've already got one house, the government's going to help you out to buy 2, 3 or 4 by giving you a tax break, and then you not only can negatively gear that house, but then at the end of that period you can sell it and get a tax break on selling it, right? Now, if you're an ordinary wage earner, you haven't got that. If you don't have a house, like you haven't got accumulated wealth already, you're not going to have access to those tricks in the same way. So get rid of that and use the money that we're going to save from that, because it comes at the cost of several $billions a year to the budget. Use that money to increase the stock of public and affordable housing. And building more public housing, for example, not everyone wants to live in public housing, but if you have more public housing, you have more supply, and it's going to start driving down rents, and it's going to start making housing more generally more affordable, to take a lot of heat out of the market. And we've got a homelessness crisis at the moment, right? And we've got a lot of people, we've got a problem with low wages growth in the economy. And so I think if you had a construction-led economic recovery that's about building affordable housing, and you fund it by getting rid of the tax breaks for those who've already got a lot of wealth, you start to make housing more affordable, and you tick a lot of the boxes in terms of economic recovery and economic stimulus at the moment, and you'd start to allow young people to break into the market a bit more. I think there's also things we should do on renting. I think we should look at sort of European style long-term leases. I think we should look at rent control to make housing more affordable, so you can save up more for your mortgage. But the big thing, I think the real kernel that we've got to crack is the way our tax treatment treats housing not as a human right, but as an investment class.
A report released in March found youth unemployment and underemployment in Australia to be 13.5% and 18% respectively, meaning that nearly a third of young people are not employed to their full desired capacity. What kind of government initiatives or programs would you like to see implemented to improve youth employment prospects?
This is a huge problem, and I'm glad you mentioned underemployment as well, because it's a big part of it. If you just think about unemployment for the moment, basically what happens is that youth unemployment is always higher than general unemployment, which kind of makes sense when you think about the population, young people, where people are at in their lives. What you tend to find over history, though, is that every time that there's a recession or downturn, youth get hit hard, particularly hard, disproportionately hard. So the line spike jumps up for both, for unemployment, but the line jumps up proportionately higher for young people, right? And what you then find, looking back over history, is that as the economy starts getting stronger and the recession or the depression gets further behind, the figures sort of start to come back into line, right? And the normal gap reasserts itself and things continue on. But since the GFC, after the GFC, the line blew out for young people for unemployment, and it hasn't actually come back into sync with general unemployment since the GFC. So something's going on in Australia that means that for young people, unemployment remains persistently higher than it has before, and that since the GFC, I think what's happened is that we've destroyed a lot of jobs that young people might go into when you finish TAFE or uni or school, and we haven't created new ones for young people to move into. And those that have got jobs are reporting much more that they actually want to work more hours than they're getting. Right? So underemployment is growing much higher. And so actually, as far as I'm aware, if you combine and underemployment into a category that we can call underutilisation, it's actually higher for young people now than it probably has been for decades, perhaps even higher than since the Depression in Australia. So we've got a big problem, and I don't think people understand quite how big it is. And what it means is that when young people go onto the job market, especially if all you've got is high school, right? If that's you are in a world of pain in Australia at the moment. There's not that many good jobs available for you that are going to pay you the wages that you want. I think part of what's happened is that the mining boom and the GFC helped wipe out a lot of manufacturing jobs in this country, and that might be if you finished year 12 and you didn't go on to do TAFE, whatever, you might go and get a job in a manufacturing enterprise. That's not there anymore in the same way that it used to be, and the jobs that are there are part-time, and so it's just not satisfying people, not giving them the income that they want. I reckon this is a classic, like you asked me what do we do about it. First of all, we've got to acknowledge the problem, and I don't think people are really acknowledging the problem. And secondly, I think this is where government has a huge role, right? I think government has to intervene, because clearly the private sector is failing to create jobs for young people, and I think government should now intervene with some big job creation programs, right? There's a lot of stuff that we need to do in Australia. We need to transition to 100% renewable energy. That's going to require a massive amount of building and construction. We need to build homes, more affordable homes in the way that we've spoken about. We've got to repair a lot of our environment. I think there's a big case for government saying now, right, almost in the way that we did after the Depression, right, saying we're going to embark on big job creation programs because otherwise a lot of young people aren't going to get any meaningful work. And then, look, maybe if in 10 years' time the private sector's picked up again, then you could wind back on those. But at the moment, I think unless the government starts getting really stimulatory and investing in infrastructure and using record low interest rates to borrow, and starts creating and investing in some of those jobs and investing in education, because I reckon a lot of people just aren't, like, why would you continue on to university if you end up with a small mortgage sized debt? Then unless we start doing those things, I don't think we're going to fix the problem. And at the moment, I think government's got their head in the sand about it.
One of the most publicised federal unemployment policies of recent times is the Youth Jobs Path program. In your opinion, is this an effective way of curbing long-term youth unemployment? And if not, why?
I don't agree with the Path program. I don't think that it starts from this presumption that there are these wonderful jobs out there for young people, and if you're not finding those jobs, it's just because you're not trying hard enough. And if we help you intern for working for as little as $4 an hour, then all of a sudden there's going to be a permanent job for you to magically move into, and that's just not right. Like, the jobs just aren't there at the moment. And so the idea of saying what we'll do is create a scheme where people can be working for basically less than the minimum wage, and where employers can use that kind of cheap labour to basically say, oh great, well now I get a bit of government help for this job, why should I pay someone at a higher wage? I think it's actually going to push wages down, and it's not going to create long-term jobs for young people. So I think we've got to kind of take a step back and say, actually, the problem is we're not creating the jobs, right? And that's that government investment in infrastructure, investment in education, investment in those industries for the 21st century. That's how we'll create real jobs, not this scheme. So I think it's open to exploitation. I think it's almost exploitative by nature, by design. And it's holding out a bit of false hope, because at the end of it, once you've done your internship project, and the employer says, oh, well, thanks, see you later, I'm going to move on to the next person that I can get a tax break for rather than, or a wages support for rather than continuing to employ you, I think will hurt a lot of people.
News broke last week that wage growth has stalled to a record low of 1.9%. How can this stall end to ensure that Australian workers, and youth in particular, are able to cover the cost of living?
So costs continue to go up, and electricity prices in particular, rent, housing. Some costs are coming down, but a lot of the costs that you don't have a choice over, like staying warm and keeping the lights on, they're going up, having a roof over your head. And the part of the reason that people are really feeling the pinch is that wages just aren't growing, like they're flatlining basically. And it's a problem in a lot of countries around the world at the moment, this really low wages growth. And I think that part of the reason that we're finding ourselves here is that people are feeling anxious and insecure about their jobs, and a lot of people want to work more hours and feel like they need more money, but are worried that, well, maybe it'll be taken over by a robot, maybe it'll be taken over by someone from another country who will work less than me. I don't want to find myself, I'm in a lot of debt because I've got a big university debt or I've got a big mortgage. So rather than rock the boat, I think we'll just sort of stick with the job and the money that we've got. And the reason that part of the reason I think that people are feeling like that is that we spent 3 decades deregulating all our labour laws. And so we were told 3 decades ago that was the best way to do it. You've got to get rid of centralised wage fixing, you've got to push everything down. But at the same time, what we did was weaken unions and weaken people. And so I think we've now had 3 decades of people feeling a bit frightened to ask, and the people who might go and ask on their behalf, i.e. the unions, have had their hands tied. Right? And now as a result, and it's been a common pattern across the globe, and so now across the globe we're seeing really flat wages growth. And the Governor of the Reserve Bank has made the same point and has come and said to our Economics Committee in the House of Representatives, and has said publicly that when he goes to meetings of the governors internationally of the central banks, they're all scratching their heads at the moment going, we've got really low wages growth, what's going on? And it's even happening, he says, in countries where they have low unemployment as well, and you'd expect where you had low unemployment that you might see wages rising much more quickly, but he said it's not even happening there as well. So I think it comes back to what I think the answer to that comes back to what I said. At the moment, we've made it really, really hard for people and unions to actually bargain for higher wages and made people feel incredibly insecure. So I think a big part of what we've got to do next is a number of things. I think lifting the minimum wage would help sort of boost up the chain, and I think would help alleviate poverty as well. But I think we need to work out how we can make people feel more comfortable about saying, well, hang on, if the cost of everything else is going up, I want a wage rise. And I think that's a cultural thing as much as a legal thing.
The rise of automation is likely to result in a major shift in the employment landscape over the next few decades. How can young people ensure their employment prospects won't be hampered by embracing these changes and developing skills that will be in demand into the future?
I think this question of automation and how we deal with it is kind of like one of the questions of the 21st century, and I don't think we're doing it very well at the moment. I think that what we haven't worked out how to do is have the best of both worlds, of have increasing technology, including automation, in a way that makes our lives better on the one hand, but then on the other hand, have sort of as a public, as a community, say, right, well, we want those benefits to accrue to everyone, not just to a few. And at the moment, what's happening is the technology and automation side is running ahead so much faster than the public debate or the public idea about sharing the benefits or regulating it. And so as a result, you are just seeing automation create a whole lot of new value in society, but that value is just being funneled up and captured by Google or Facebook or Uber, right? Instead of actually being used to share around and make everyone's lives better. what do? Bill Gates says you tax the robots, right? Saying let's start introducing effectively some kind of automation tax so that companies that benefit from it have to contribute some money back so that you can use that to increase wages or increase welfare for the people who are remaining to be employed. I think that's kind of going down the right path. I think one thing we can't do is let young people or new entrants to the job market feel like it's their fault or their responsibility. It's like it's not. This is a collective social problem. What we've got to do is work out, should be a part of the role of government, how to stand up to the Googles and the Facebooks and the Ubers and everyone else and say, look, if you want to have the benefits of technology, it comes at a cost. And that means you look after the people who live here. And at the moment, I think even that's getting really tenuous because a lot of these corporations are bigger than governments and are circumventing governments, right? And so, but I think that's going to be probably a key to fixing it, is saying we want to have some public regulation of all of this. And that doesn't mean the government gets to decide whether you get to buy a new iPhone or not. Like it means the government says we're going to make sure the benefits of these are shared equally amongst everyone in society. And it's why some people are exploring, should we have a universal basic income, for example, because like, should we just accept that it's going to be harder to make ends meet because there'll be fewer jobs, and so therefore we should give everyone a universal basic income. I mean, they're the kind of things I think we need to discuss.
The recent closure of the Hazelwood power plant saw hundreds of workers lose their jobs. This is unlikely to be a one-off instance as Australia continues to transition away from coal and towards other forms of energy. What would you recommend as a plan to ensure that there isn't a major surge in structural unemployment and that coal workers can transition into new jobs?
We had a Senate committee looking into the question of retirement of coal-fired power stations, and it heard evidence that for Australia to meet the climate targets that the world agreed to at the Paris Agreement, which is to try and limit global warming to below 2 degrees, we're going to need to shut the equivalent of one Hazelwood a year between now and 2030. All right, so it's a really significant change that needs to happen and happen very quickly. And with Hazelwood, was done really badly, and the company gave people about 5 months notice of the closure. That's not enough time to grow new jobs, secure good industries, or even to give people time to retrain, frankly, if they want to retrain and move on to somewhere else. So we know at the moment that we've got this big transition that's happening, and it has to probably happen quicker, but government's just treating plan like another 4-letter word at the moment, right? There's just no willingness to sit down and plan this. We've been, I'm going around this year visiting coal-fired power stations, communities around the country to talk about exactly this issue. So we've been down in the Latrobe Valley saying, what would it mean to have a proper transition plan for here? And I think a big part of it is you would set up an agency at the federal level that says, right, we're going to need more electricity, population's going to continue to grow, we want to electrify our cars and our buses, and so we're actually going to need more electricity. The question is, where's it going to be produced? We've got to get off coal. Let's look firstly at these places that we're shutting down coal-fired power stations. Are they actually okay places to generate renewable energy? And in a chunk of times they will be. Or they might be a great place to put a new pumped hydro storage dam facility there. If so, let's retrain, or let's build the new renewable energy there. If it's not, secondly, what are we going to need to do to grow new industries in those places? So, and what are the new industries that will work down there? And that might mean giving companies tax breaks to come and invest in there to say, look, if you're prepared to be around here for 10 years, we'll give you a tax holiday. Or it might mean saying we're going to invest in infrastructure there. And thirdly, if after doing all of that, you've still got a jobs deficit because you're not going to be able to get all the people soaked up by new renewables or by new industries, then you start looking at retraining some of the people who are there at the moment so that they could move into other industries elsewhere. But at the moment, no one's doing any of that. And so these communities are just being smashed when a company comes in and says, right, we're going to close our coal-fired power station in 5 months. And I think we need to make sure, we need to grab it by the scruff of the neck and we need to make sure that no one is left behind, and we make the transition so that when your Lawn power station closes in 5 years' time, let's say, that there's new industries and secure jobs for people to move into.
You criticised this year's federal budget due to its lack of policies tackling climate change. What types of budgetary policies would you like to see implemented that will tackle climate change whilst not hampering economic growth?
Look, I want to see Australia become a renewable energy superpower, right? I want us to be the place that you come to from the region or from anywhere around the world if you want clean, cheap and reliable electricity, right? So come and set up your data centre in Australia, or come and set up your gigafactory in Australia, because we will give you clean, cheap, renewable electricity. So I think we've got enormous opportunity, not only for that, but for actually exporting it. And like some of the next steps of research are about how we take electricity and turn it, for example, turn it using renewable energy, turn it into hydrogen fuel that can then be exported, like in the same way that we export LNG at the moment. Is it batteries? Like, we've actually got increasingly the technology of making liquid solar fuel, right? And so I think that with a bit of foresight, Australia could be a real pioneer and world leader. Like, as we do at the moment, we export coal and LNG. Let's work out how we become a renewables rich nation and even export that, right? And if not exporting the actual energy, export the technology to other places nearby. So I think there's enormous opportunity, and I think if we transition to we've got to transition away from coal to renewables. That's a massive infrastructure project. Like, to do that, our electricity grid is a series of lines out to coal mines at the moment. Like, and if we're all of a sudden going to turn that into this decentralised smart grid that can support a bit of solar over here and wind over there and some pumped hydro over there, it's a massive engineering feat that no country's really done yet. So I think it would be incredibly stimulatory for the economy to do that. And what we know is that when you set the signal, we're going to start making pollution pay for some of the costs of the externalities of it. You've got to start paying for it now. It generates new industries and it generates new areas of employment. So I think, and then overarching all of that is that, look, if climate change hits in the way the scientists are talking about, Ross Garnaut said that we are looking at, by the end of the century, a 92% decline in productivity in the Murray-Darling Basin, right? It's a world of pain awaiting us and our economy if we don't tackle climate change now. So I don't think, so I think taking action on climate change now not only would be kind of stimulatory in the short and medium term, but it's actually the only way of securing a strong economy in the long term. Otherwise, countries like Australia are pretty exposed. Our electricity grid, for example, is very thin and long, and when you have cyclones or when we have severe storms, we're at risk. A lot of our population is at risk every time it gets really hot. We rely on agriculture, and that's being affected by climate change. So we've got a big loss, a human loss and an economic loss facing us if we don't take it seriously. And that's why I think any budget at the moment that doesn't mention climate change is not serious. It's not a serious document.
Okay. Thank you for answering.